Emily Johnson slammed her phone down on the cafe table, her hands shaking as she stared at the email that had just destroyed her life. 3 years of work. Gone. The Morrison Historic District project, her last hope to save her architecture firm, had been awarded to Preston and Associates instead. This can't be happening, she whispered, scrolling through the rejection email again. The client cited concerns about her firm's financial stability. Financial stability she wouldn't have questioned if she'd known someone was systematically sabotaging her contracts. Rain hammered against the windows of Moonbeam Roastery as Emily fought back tears. She'd chosen this small cafe in Southeast Portland specifically because no one from her professional circle would find her here. The last thing she needed was pity from colleagues who'd probably heard the news before she did. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Emily looked up to find a man standing beside her table, water dripping from his dark hair onto the worn wooden floor. He wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans, both soaked from the storm outside. His hands, she noticed, were calloused and scarred, working hands. "Actually, yes," Emily said, turning back to her laptop. "I'm using the whole table. Look, I get it. Bad day, but there's literally nowhere else to sit, and the barista said the storm's not letting up for another hour." He gestured toward the crowded cafe. Every other table was occupied, and a line of drenched customers waited by the door. Emily glanced around, realizing he was right. The small cafe was packed with people seeking shelter from the unexpected downpour. She closed her laptop with a sharp snap. "Fine, but I'm not in the mood for conversation." "Wouldn't dream of it." The man slid into the chair across from her, extending his hand. "Mike Carter." Emily. She didn't offer her last name or shake his hand. Mike ordered black coffee and pulled out a beat-up paperback novel, respecting her request for silence. Emily tried to focus on updating her resume, but her eyes kept drifting to her tablemate. Despite his casual appearance, something about him seemed off. The way he held himself suggested confidence that didn't match his working-class clothes. And that watch he kept sliding under his sleeve. She'd seen enough luxury timepieces in her line of work to recognize quality when she saw it. 20 minutes passed before Mike broke the silence. "Architect." Emily's head snapped up. "What?" "Your laptop screen. CAD software, blueprints. Either architect or engineer." He closed his book, and Emily noticed it was a first edition Steinbeck. Not exactly typical construction worker reading material. "Architect." Soon-to-be former architect. The words slipped out before she could stop them. "Rough day at the office." Emily let out a bitter laugh. "More like rough year. Try rough 3 years." She wasn't sure why she was opening up to a stranger, but something about Mike's steady presence felt safe. "I'm about to lose everything I've worked for." "What kind of architecture?" "Historic preservation and restoration. I specialize in bringing old buildings back to life while maintaining their original character." Emily found herself explaining despite her earlier declaration about not wanting conversation. There's something about taking a structure that's been forgotten and showing people its potential again. Mike leaned forward, genuinely interested. "That must take incredible skill, understanding both the original construction methods and modern safety requirements." Emily studied his face, surprised by his insight. Most people didn't grasp the complexity of her work. "You seem to know something about construction." "I work with my hands. You pick up things over the years." Mike's answer was vague, but Emily didn't press. She had enough problems without prying into a stranger's life. "The building I'm working on now, or was working on, is from 1892. Beautiful Romanesque revival style with sandstone facades and hand-carved details that you just don't see anymore." Emily's voice grew passionate despite her earlier despair. "The client was going to let me restore the entire historic district. It would have been my masterpiece. What happened? Someone else got the contract. Apparently, my firm isn't financially stable enough for such an important project." Emily's jaw clenched, which is ironic, since I wouldn't be financially unstable if clients hadn't started backing out of projects left and right over the past 6 months. Mike's expression darkened almost imperceptibly. "That's odd. Has anyone else in your field experienced similar problems?" "Not that I know of. Just lucky me, I guess." Emily glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should go. The rain's letting up." As she packed her laptop, Mike stood as well. "Emily, I know we just met, but would you maybe want to grab dinner sometime? You seem like someone who could use a friend." Emily hesitated. The last thing she needed was romantic complications when her career was imploding. But Mike's offer sounded genuine, not predatory. And she had to admit, his presence had been oddly comforting. I don't know. Things are pretty complicated right now. Just dinner. No expectations. Mike pulled out his phone. Maybe you could tell me more about that historic building. I'd love to hear about the restoration process. Against her better judgment, Emily found herself giving him her number. As she walked toward the door, she caught Mike watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Concern mixed with something else. Something that looked almost like guilt. Outside, the storm clouds were breaking apart, revealing patches of clear sky. Emily didn't know that the man she'd just met was about to turn her world upside down in ways she couldn't imagine. All she knew was that for the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. 2 weeks after their first meeting, Emily found herself looking forward to Mike's texts more than she cared to admit. He'd kept his word about dinner, taking her to a small Vietnamese restaurant in Southeast where they'd talked for 3 hours about everything except her failing business. Now they met regularly, always at places that matched his supposed carpenter salary: food trucks, dive bars, coffee shops with mismatched furniture. You're overthinking the beam placement, Mike said, studying the sketches Emily had spread across their usual table at Moonbeam Roastery. The original builders would have prioritized structural integrity over aesthetic symmetry. Emily looked up from her drawings, pen frozen in her hand. How do you know that? Like I said, you pick things up. Mike's answer came too quickly, and he immediately focused on his coffee cup. My grandfather was in construction. Old school methods. It was a plausible explanation, but Emily had noticed these moments before. Mike's insights went beyond casual observation or inherited knowledge. Last week, he'd casually mentioned the difference between mortise and tenon joints versus dovetail construction in 19th century millwork. The week before, he'd corrected her assumption about load-bearing techniques used in Romanesque revival buildings. Your grandfather must have been quite the craftsman, Emily said carefully. Something like that. Mike shifted in his chair, and Emily caught a glimpse of his watch as his sleeve rode up. The same expensive timepiece she'd noticed during their first meeting. Today, however, she could see enough detail to recognize the brand, a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's annual salary. Mike caught her stare and quickly pulled his sleeve down. It was my father's. Nice inheritance. Emily kept her tone neutral, but her mind was racing. A carpenter inheriting a $50,000 watch seemed unlikely, even if it was a family heirloom. Yeah, well, family's complicated. Mike's discomfort was obvious now. He changed the subject with practiced ease. Have you heard anything more about the Morrison project? Preston and Associates started demolition prep last week. Emily's stomach churned at the memory of driving past the historic building and seeing the construction fencing. They're gutting the interior instead of preserving the original features. It's architectural vandalism. That's criminal. Someone should stop them. With what authority? They won the contract fair and square. Emily gathered her sketches, her mood darkening. Besides, I can't exactly afford to take on the City Planning Commission when I'm 3 months behind on rent. Mike was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice held an odd intensity. What if someone offered to back you financially? Anonymously, would you take the case to court? Emily stared at him. What are you talking about? Hypothetically, if you had unlimited resources, could you prove that gutting the Morrison building violates historic preservation laws? Probably, but that's not how the world works. Anonymous benefactors don't just materialize to fund architects' legal battles. Emily studied Mike's face, noting the way his jaw tightened when she mentioned money. Besides, where would a carpenter get ideas about unlimited resources? I watch a lot of legal dramas. Mike's attempt at humor fell flat. Look, I just hate seeing talented people get screwed by the system. Emily wanted to push harder, but Mike's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glimpsed the name on the screen before he could silence it. Sterling. The contact photo showed an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. Sorry, work emergency, Mike said, declining the call without answering. Sterling Construction? Emily asked. Something like that. Mike stood abruptly. I should go? Rain check on dinner tonight. Sure. Emily watched him leave, noting how he held himself differently when he thought she wasn't looking. His shoulders straightened. His stride became more confident, more purposeful. It was subtle, but Emily had trained herself to observe details. Mike Carter carried himself like someone accustomed to authority, not someone who took orders on construction sites. After he left, Emily pulled out her phone and searched for Sterling Construction in Portland. The results showed several small contracting firms, but nothing that would require emergency calls on a Wednesday afternoon. She tried different variations: Sterling Building, Sterling Development, Sterling Industries. The last search made her breath catch. Sterling Industries wasn't a construction company at all. It was a massive conglomerate with interests in real estate development, manufacturing, and technology. The kind of company that could buy and sell small architecture firms without noticing the expense. The company's website featured a photo of their corporate headquarters, a gleaming 40-story tower in downtown Portland that Emily recognized immediately. She'd submitted a proposal to restore the building's historic lobby 3 years ago. The project had gone to a larger firm, but Emily remembered the extensive background checks Sterling Industries had required for all potential contractors. They'd wanted financial records, references, even personal information about key employees. Emily's hands trembled as she scrolled through the website's leadership page. The CEO was listed as Margaret Sterling, but there was no photo. However, the board of directors included several family members, including a Michael Sterling listed as vice president of development. The photo was several years old and taken at a formal event, but the face was unmistakable. Mike Carter was Michael Sterling, heir to one of the largest fortunes on the West Coast, and he'd been lying to her from the moment they met. Emily's phone rang, jolting her from her shock. Mike's name appeared on the screen, and she stared at it for several rings before answering. "Hey, about tonight." Mike's voice sounded strained. "Something came up at work. Can we postpone?" "Of course." Emily kept her voice steady. "Work emergencies happen. Thanks for understanding. I'll make it up to you this weekend." After hanging up, Emily sat in the empty cafe and tried to process what she'd discovered. Every conversation they'd had took on new meaning when viewed through this lens. Mike's knowledge about construction, his insights into business, his strange discomfort around money, it all made sense now. But what didn't make sense was why he was lying to her. Emily was nobody special, just a struggling architect with a failing business. What could Michael Sterling possibly want from her? Emily spent the weekend researching everything she could find about Michael Sterling and his family's business empire. By Monday morning, she'd made a decision that surprised even her. She wouldn't confront Mike about his identity yet. Instead, she'd wait and see what he was really after. Her opportunity came sooner than expected. "I have a proposition for you," Mike said Tuesday afternoon as they walked along the Willamette River. "There's a building I know about that needs restoration work. The owner might be willing to hire you." Emily's pulse quickened. "What kind of building?" 1880s warehouse in the Pearl District. Beautiful brick construction, cast iron details, but it's been neglected for decades. Mike's enthusiasm seemed genuine. The owner wants to convert it to loft apartments while preserving the historic character. That sounds too good to be true. Emily stopped walking and faced him. "Who's the owner?" "A private investor. Someone who values craftsmanship over quick profits." Mike met her gaze steadily. "Would you be interested in taking a look?" Emily knew she should be suspicious, but the prospect of actual work was too tempting to refuse. How about now?" 20 minutes later, they stood outside a 4-story brick building that took Emily's breath away. Despite years of neglect, the structure's bones were magnificent. Tall windows with decorative lintels, ornate cornices, and ironwork that spoke of an era when buildings were crafted rather than merely constructed. "It's incredible," Emily whispered, running her hand along the weathered brick facade. Mike produced a set of keys from his pocket. "Want to see the inside?" The building's interior was a preservationist's dream. Original wide plank floors stretched beneath soaring ceilings supported by massive timber beams. Cast iron columns rose like trees through the open space, their decorative capitals still intact despite decades of dust and debris. "The structural integrity is solid," Mike said, testing one of the support beams. "These old-growth timbers will outlast anything built today." Emily pulled out her phone and began taking photos, her mind already racing with possibilities. "The owner would really consider hiring me?" "I think you'd be surprised what the owner might consider." Mike's tone was carefully neutral. "Why don't you put together a proposal?" As Emily moved through the space, documenting existing conditions and envisioning potential layouts, Mike rolled up his sleeves and began clearing debris from around the main support columns. His movements were confident, practiced, not the tentative actions of someone unfamiliar with construction sites. "You've done this before," Emily observed. "Cleaned up old buildings?" "Sure." Mike lifted a section of fallen plaster. "Sometimes the best way to understand a structure is to get your hands dirty." Emily was photographing decorative molding when she noticed something carved into one of the main support beams. At first glance, it looked like random scratches left by construction workers, but closer inspection revealed a deliberate pattern, a shield with intertwined letters surrounded by ornate scrollwork. "Mike, come look at this." He appeared beside her, and Emily heard his sharp intake of breath. "Interesting," he said carefully. "Probably a stonemason's mark or builder's signature." Emily studied the carving more closely, then glanced at Mike's left hand. He wore a simple gold band on his ring finger, something she'd assumed was a wedding ring from his previous marriage. Now, however, she could see that the ring's surface bore an engraved design. "Can I see your ring for a second?" Mike's hand instinctively closed into a fist. "Why? The pattern looks familiar." Emily kept her voice casual. "My grandfather was a jeweler. I'm interested in the craftsmanship." Reluctantly, Mike slipped off the ring and handed it to her. Emily's suspicions were confirmed. The engraving matched the beam carving exactly. The same shield, the same intertwined letters, the same ornate border design. "Family crest?" she asked, handing the ring back. "Something like that." Mike slid the ring back onto his finger, but Emily noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "The letters look like S and R, Sterling and Robert. My middle name." Mike's answer came too quickly. "It was my grandfather's ring." Emily nodded as if accepting his explanation, but her mind was working furiously. If this building belonged to the Sterling family, which seemed increasingly likely, then Mike's presence here wasn't coincidental. Nothing about their relationship was coincidental. "I should get some measurements," Emily said, pulling out her tape measure. "If I'm going to write a serious proposal." They spent the next 2 hours documenting the building's condition. Mike proved surprisingly helpful, holding the tape measure and pointing out structural details that Emily might have missed. His knowledge was too extensive for a casual construction worker, but Emily played along with his charade. As they prepared to leave, Emily noticed a black sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there when they arrived. 2 men in suits sat in the front seats, apparently reading newspapers, but Emily caught one of them watching Mike through the building's windows. "Friends of yours?" she asked quietly. Mike followed her gaze, and his expression hardened. "No, just downtown businessmen." But Emily saw how Mike's posture changed, becoming more guarded. As they walked to his truck, she noticed him checking mirrors and scanning the street with the awareness of someone accustomed to being watched. During the drive back to her apartment, Emily's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Michael Sterling seen entering Pearl District property with unidentified female. Recommend increased surveillance." Emily quickly deleted the message, her heart pounding. Someone was definitely watching Mike, and now they were watching her too. "Thank you for today," she said as Mike pulled up to her building. "I'll have a proposal ready by Friday." "Emily." Mike caught her hand as she reached for the door handle. "I want you to know that whatever happens, my feelings for you are real." The intensity in his voice made her stomach flutter despite everything she'd discovered. "Why would anything happen? Just remember that, okay?" As Emily watched Mike drive away, she realized she was falling in love with a man whose very existence was built on lies. And somehow, that terrified her more than the mysterious surveillance or the family crest carved into century-old timber. What terrified her most was that despite everything, she didn't want to stop. Margaret Sterling ended the call and stared at the surveillance photos spread across her mahogany desk. Her grandson Michael stood beside an attractive brunette outside a Pearl District warehouse, and from his body language, this wasn't a casual business meeting. "How long has this been going on?" Margaret asked her head of security, James Walsh. 6 weeks, ma'am. They meet regularly at coffee shops, restaurants. Always in Southeast Portland, never anywhere he might be recognized. Margaret picked up one of the photos, studying the woman's face. Pretty enough, but unremarkable. Certainly not the type of polished socialite she'd envisioned for Michael's eventual marriage. "What do we know about her?" Emily Johnson, 29, owner of Johnson Architecture. Small firm specializing in historic preservation. Walsh placed a thick file on the desk. "She's having significant financial difficulties." "How significant?" 3 months behind on office rent. maxed out credit lines, lost several major contracts in the past 6 months. Her business is essentially insolvent. Margaret opened the file and began reading. Emily Johnson had graduated magna cum laude from Portland State's architecture program, won several design awards early in her career, and built a respectable reputation in historic preservation circles. On paper, she was exactly the type of ambitious professional Margaret might have respected under different circumstances. Has she approached Michael for money? No indication of that. In fact, our surveillance suggests she believes he's a carpenter named Mike Carter. Margaret's eyebrows rose. He's using a false identity? Complete fabrication. Social security number, employment history, even a rental apartment in Southeast. Someone put considerable effort into creating this cover. Michael did this himself? Appears so. The apartment was leased 8 months ago, shortly after his last argument with you about assuming more responsibility at Sterling Industries. Margaret leaned back in her leather chair, processing this information. Michael had always been rebellious, but creating an entirely false identity suggested a level of deception she hadn't anticipated. More concerning was his obvious emotional investment in this charade. Tell me about her financial problems. Are they legitimate? Walsh consulted his notes. The first contract cancellation occurred 6 months ago. Jameson Development pulled out of a restoration project citing budget concerns. 2 weeks later, Pacific Northwest Properties terminated her contract for the Morrison Historic District, stating concerns about her firm's stability. Jameson Development. Margaret repeated the name thoughtfully. Remind me, who owns that company? Sterling Industries holds a controlling interest through our real estate subsidiary. Margaret's smile was predatory. How interesting. And Pacific Northwest Properties. We provide their primary construction financing. So Michael's little girlfriend has been losing contracts to companies we control, and she has no idea. Margaret closed the file with a sharp snap. Bring me everything we have on Emily Johnson's family background, education, professional associations. I want to know who she is and what she wants. Already in progress, ma'am. There is one interesting detail. Walsh produced another document. Emily Johnson's father, Robert Johnson, worked for Sterling Industries from 2015 until his death in 2018. Margaret's attention sharpened. In what capacity? Financial auditor, internal compliance division. He specialized in reviewing subsidiary operations for regulatory violations. I don't recall any Robert Johnson. He worked exclusively with mid-level subsidiaries. Apparently died in a car accident while investigating irregularities at one of our Portland development projects. Margaret stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland. The Sterling Industries Tower commanded the skyline, a testament to 3 generations of carefully accumulated power. She wouldn't allow a romantic entanglement to jeopardize everything her family had built. What was he investigating when he died? The file was sealed after his death, but preliminary reports suggest he'd found evidence of bid rigging and contractor kickbacks in several development projects. And now his daughter is romantically involved with my grandson. Margaret's voice was ice cold. Either this is an extraordinary coincidence, or Miss Johnson is more calculating than she appears. What would you like me to do? Margaret returned to her desk and pulled out her private phone, scrolling through contacts until she found the number she needed. First, I want Emily Johnson's financial situation to become catastrophic. Cancel any remaining contracts through our subsidiary companies. Ensure that no one in our network of business associates hires her firm. That could destroy her completely. Exactly. Margaret's fingers drummed against the desk. Then, once she's desperate enough, we'll offer her a lifeline. Anonymous financial backing for a restoration project. Something significant enough to solve all her problems. What kind of project? The Morrison Historic District. We'll arrange for Preston and Associates to encounter unexpected complications that force them to withdraw. Emily Johnson will get a second chance at her dream project, funded by a mysterious benefactor who wishes to remain anonymous. Walsh looked confused. Why would you want to help her? Because grateful people are controllable people. Emily Johnson will owe her professional salvation to Sterling Industries, even if she doesn't know it. When the time comes to end her relationship with Michael, she'll have too much to lose to resist our guidance. Margaret picked up her phone and dialed. Mrs. Patterson? It's Margaret Sterling. I need you to arrange a board meeting for tomorrow morning. We need to discuss some adjustments to our real estate development strategy. As she ended the call, Margaret studied the surveillance photos again. Michael looked happier than she'd seen him in years, which only confirmed her suspicions. This Emily Johnson represented a threat to everything Margaret had planned for Sterling Industries' future. "There's one more thing," Walsh said hesitantly. "Michael's been asking questions about the Pearl District warehouse. He's shown the property to Miss Johnson, apparently as a potential project. That building has been in our family for 40 years. What's his interest in it now? Unknown, but he's had the utilities restored and hired security for the property. Someone's been conducting detailed structural assessments." Margaret's eyes narrowed. The Pearl District warehouse held significance beyond its real estate value. Her late husband had used it for meetings that required absolute discretion, and certain business records were still stored in its basement vault. "Double the security on that property immediately, and I want to know every detail of Michael's activities there." As Walsh left her office, Margaret stared out at the city skyline and began planning her campaign against Emily Johnson. The young woman had no idea she'd stumbled into a war that had been decades in the making. Margaret Sterling hadn't built an empire by allowing emotional attachments to compromise business interests. Emily Johnson would learn that lesson the hard way. Emily almost missed the photograph entirely. She'd spent 3 hours at the Portland City Archives researching building permits for the Pearl District warehouse, hoping to uncover more details about its history before submitting her restoration proposal. The microfilm reader was giving her a headache, and she was ready to call it a day when she noticed a familiar face in the corner of a 2019 newspaper clipping. The photo accompanied an article about Sterling Industries' charitable foundation donating $5 million to historic preservation efforts. In the background of the staged photo, standing beside Margaret Sterling herself, was Mike Carter. Except the caption identified him as Michael Sterling, Vice President of Development. Emily's hands trembled as she printed the image. Mike looked different in the photo, confident, polished, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than Emily's monthly rent. But it was definitely him. The same strong jawline, the same dark eyes, the same hands that had helped her measure timber beams just 2 days ago. She stared at the printout for a long time, her mind racing through every conversation they'd had, every moment when his knowledge had seemed too extensive, every time he'd deflected questions about his background. The expensive watch, the first edition books, his uncanny understanding of historic construction techniques. It all made perfect sense now. Emily's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Dinner tonight? I know a great place in Hawthorne." Instead of responding, she called him. "Hey, beautiful." Mike's voice was warm with affection. "I was hoping you'd call. I have some good news about the warehouse project. We need to talk. Now." The change in her tone was immediate and unmistakable. Mike was quiet for several seconds. "What's wrong?" "Meet me at the warehouse in 30 minutes. We need to have a conversation that should have happened weeks ago." "Emily, what's going on?" 30 minutes, Mike. Or should I say Michael?" She hung up before he could respond. Emily arrived at the Pearl District warehouse first, using the keys Mike had given her to let herself inside. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the wide plank floors. Standing in the space they'd explored together, she felt the weight of every lie he'd told her. Mike arrived exactly 30 minutes later, and Emily could see from his expression that he knew the game was over. He moved differently now, with the unconscious authority she'd glimpsed in unguarded moments. The carpenter's facade was already beginning to crumble. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. Emily held up the newspaper clipping. "Since about an hour ago. But I should have figured it out weeks ago. The signs were all there." Mike studied the photograph, his jaw tight. "Where did you find this?" "Does it matter? The question is why you've been lying to me for 2 months." Emily's voice was steady, but Mike could hear the hurt underneath her anger. "Was any of it real, Michael? Or is this all some kind of elaborate game?" "Don't call me that." Mike stepped closer, and Emily could see the pain in his eyes. "I haven't been Michael Sterling with you. Not once. Every moment we've spent together, I've been exactly who I want to be. A carpenter named Mike Carter who doesn't exist. A man who can talk to you about your work without you wondering what I want from you. Someone you can trust to help you measure beams and clear debris without calculating what favors I might expect in return." Mike's voice was raw with emotion. "Do you have any idea what it's like to meet someone who sees you as just a person? not a bank account or a business opportunity or a way to gain access to power. Emily felt her resolve wavering at the pain in his voice, but she forced herself to stay angry. So you decided to lie to me instead? About everything. I told you my middle name was Robert. That's true. I told you I work with my hands. Also true. I've been learning carpentry and restoration techniques for the past year because I actually care about preserving these buildings. Mike ran his hands through his hair. I told you my feelings for you are real. That's the most true thing I've ever said. But you're not a carpenter struggling to make ends meet. You're the heir to a billion-dollar empire. Emily's voice cracked slightly. Do you understand how humiliating this is? I've been complaining to you about money problems, about losing contracts, about not being able to afford rent. You must have been laughing at me. I have never once laughed at you. Mike's voice was fierce. And your problems are real, Emily. More real than you know. What does that mean? Mike hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. Some of the contracts you lost. The companies involved have connections to Sterling Industries. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. What kind of connections? Financial backing, subsidiary relationships. My grandmother has influence over a lot of development projects in this city. Your grandmother sabotaged my business. I don't know, but I intend to find out. Mike moved toward her, and Emily instinctively stepped back. Emily, I swear to you, I had nothing to do with your contract problems. I didn't even know who you were when we met. But you know who I am now. You've known for weeks. Emily's anger was building again. And you said nothing while I struggled to save my company from bankruptcy that your family might have caused. I wanted to tell you. I've wanted to tell you the truth since our second date, but I knew this would happen. I knew you'd look at me differently. Of course I'm looking at you differently. You're not the person I thought you were. Yes, I am. Mike's voice was desperate now. Emily, the man you've been falling in love with is exactly who I am. Not the suits and boardrooms and family expectations. This. Us. Working with our hands. Talking about bringing old buildings back to life. Sitting in coffee shops and planning a future together. A future built on lies. A future built on the only honest relationship I've ever had. Mike pulled the ring from his finger, the one with the Sterling family crest, and held it out to her. Take it. Sell it. Throw it away. I don't care. I'll walk away from all of it. The company, the money, the family name. We can start over somewhere else. Emily stared at the ring, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Emily, I love you. Not Emily Johnson, the architect. Not Emily Johnson who needs financial help. I love you. The woman who gets excited about crown molding details and fights for buildings that other people want to tear down. The woman who makes me want to be better than I was raised to be. I need time to think. Emily backed toward the door, her emotions in chaos. I can't process this right now. Emily, please don't walk away from us. There is no us, Mike. There's you, Michael Sterling, and there's me, the woman you've been lying to for 2 months. I don't even know which version of you is real anymore. As Emily reached the door, Mike called after her. The man who loves you is real. Everything else is just circumstances. Emily paused with her hand on the door handle. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe circumstances are all we have. She left him standing alone in the warehouse, surrounded by the ghosts of everything they might have built together. Emily spent 3 sleepless nights avoiding Mike's calls and texts. She'd thrown herself into research, determined to understand exactly who Michael Sterling was and what his family's empire really involved. What she discovered made her stomach turn. Sterling Industries had tentacles in every major development project in the Pacific Northwest. Through a network of subsidiaries, shell companies, and financial partnerships, they controlled construction contracts, municipal permits, and historic preservation funding. Emily realized that nearly every major project she'd bid on in the past 3 years had some connection to Mike's family. She was sitting in her office Thursday morning, staring at a wall of evidence she'd printed and pinned up like a detective investigating a crime, when her secretary knocked. There's a woman here to see you. Says it's about your father. Emily's blood went cold. What woman? Margaret Sterling. She says she has information you need to hear. Emily's hands shook as she contemplated the name. Mike's grandmother, the matriarch of the Sterling Empire. What could she possibly want with Emily? Send her in. Margaret Sterling entered Emily's modest office like she owned it, which, Emily realized with growing dread, she probably could if she wanted to. She was exactly what Emily had expected, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. "Miss Johnson, thank you for seeing me without an appointment." Emily gestured to the chair across from her desk, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "Mrs. Sterling, I have to admit, I'm surprised you know who I am." "Oh, I know quite a lot about you. Your education, your business struggles, your recent romantic entanglement with my grandson." Margaret settled into the chair with practiced elegance. "I also knew your father." The words hit Emily like a physical blow. "That's impossible. My father was an accountant for a small municipal consulting firm." "Your father was Robert Johnson, was he not? Born in Seattle, graduated from University of Washington with a degree in accounting and finance?" "Yes, but he worked for Sterling Industries from 2015 until his death in 2018. Financial auditor, internal compliance division." Margaret opened her purse and withdrew a thin file folder. "These are his employment records." Emily's hands trembled as she opened the folder. There was her father's signature on a Sterling Industries employment contract, his photo on a company ID badge, performance reviews written in corporate language she'd never heard him use. The man she thought she knew had lived an entirely separate professional life she'd never suspected. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth about why your father died. He died in a car accident. Black ice on Highway 26. Margaret's expression was carefully neutral. He died while driving to a meeting with the state attorney general's office. A meeting where he planned to present evidence of systematic bid rigging and contractor fraud within Sterling Industries' development division. Emily felt the room spinning around her. "What evidence?" "Your father had discovered that Sterling Industries was manipulating municipal contracts, bribing city officials, and using shell companies to eliminate competition from smaller firms." Margaret's voice was calm, almost conversational. He'd spent months documenting these activities, building a case that would have resulted in federal charges and the dissolution of several subsidiary companies. "You're lying. The evidence was never presented because your father died the night before his scheduled meeting. Very convenient timing." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Miss Johnson, have you experienced any unusual difficulties with contracts over the past few years? Projects that seemed certain but fell through at the last minute?" Emily's mouth went dry. The Morrison Historic District project, the Jameson development contract, a dozen smaller jobs that had evaporated without explanation. Those were business decisions, market forces. Were they? Or were they a systematic campaign to eliminate a potential threat? Margaret's smile was sharp as a blade. "You see, after your father's death, certain people became concerned that he might have shared his suspicions with his family. Your business difficulties began shortly after you started gaining recognition in historic preservation circles. Perhaps someone wanted to ensure you never became successful enough to ask uncomfortable questions." "Stop." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "Just stop. I understand this is difficult to hear, but you need to know that my grandson was fully briefed on your father's investigation when he joined the company's executive team 2 years ago. Michael knows exactly who you are and why your business has been targeted." The betrayal cut deeper than Emily thought possible. Not only had Mike lied about his identity, but he'd known about her father's death, known about the systematic destruction of her career, and said nothing while watching her struggle. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because despite what you might think of my family, I believe in honesty. And because I think you deserve better than being manipulated by a man who's been using your pain for his own entertainment." Emily stared at the employment records, trying to process everything Margaret had revealed. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I simply thought you should know the truth before making any decisions about your future." Margaret stood smoothly. "However, I will say this. If you were interested in pursuing justice for your father, you might find that certain documents have recently become available. Documents that could finally expose the corruption that killed him." "What documents?" "Financial records, correspondence, meeting transcripts. Everything your father gathered before his death. It seems Michael's recent interest in historic preservation has led him to access some very old files." Margaret placed a business card on Emily's desk. "If you decide you want answers about what really happened to your father, call me. But I'd suggest you be very careful who you trust. Some people have been keeping secrets for a very long time." After Margaret left, Emily sat alone in her office, staring at her father's Sterling Industries ID photo. The man in the picture looked tired, worried, nothing like the cheerful accountant who'd taught her to appreciate architecture during weekend walks through Portland's historic neighborhoods. Her phone buzzed with another text from Mike. "Emily, please talk to me. We can work through this together." Together. The word felt like mockery now. How could they work through anything when their entire relationship was built on lies? How could she trust anything Mike said when he'd known about her father's death and her family's connection to Sterling Industries from the beginning? Emily picked up her phone and typed a response. "I know about my father. I know you've known who I am since we met. Don't contact me again." Mike's reply came instantly. "What are you talking about? Emily, please let me explain." But Emily had already turned off her phone. She'd heard enough explanations, enough carefully crafted half-truths. Margaret Sterling might be a calculating woman with her own agenda, but at least she'd been honest about the family's corruption. At least she'd given Emily the truth about her father. Michael Sterling had given her nothing but lies wrapped in declarations of love. And Emily was done being anyone's fool. 6 months had passed since Emily walked out of the Pearl District warehouse, and she'd transformed into someone she barely recognized. The woman who once found joy in restoring forgotten buildings now spent 18-hour days in a cramped downtown law office, surrounded by boxes of evidence and legal documents that painted a picture of corporate corruption spanning decades. Attorney Sarah Chun looked up from the stack of financial records Emily had delivered that morning. "This is incredible work, Emily. You've documented a pattern of bid manipulation going back 15 years. It's not enough." Emily's voice was hoarse from exhaustion. "We need proof that connects the contract manipulation directly to my father's death. Without that, it's just corporate misconduct, not murder." Emily had thrown herself into the investigation with an intensity that worried her few remaining friends. She'd liquidated her business, sold her apartment, and used every penny to hire Chen's firm. The case against Sterling Industries had become her obsession, her only reason for getting up each morning. "Have you considered that your father's death might really have been an accident? Sometimes coincidences do happen. Not this kind of coincidence." Emily pulled out a timeline she'd constructed, every date marked with color-coded annotations. "My father requested a meeting with the Attorney General on Tuesday. Wednesday, he called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Thursday night, he died on a road he'd driven safely for decades." What Emily didn't mention was the other timeline she'd been tracking, Michael Sterling's movements during that same period. According to corporate records she'd obtained through public information requests, Mike had been in Seattle on business the week her father died. Part of her wanted to believe his presence. There was another coincidence, but the evidence was making that increasingly difficult. Chen's phone rang, interrupting Emily's thoughts. "Chun and Associates." "Yes, she's here. I'll ask her." "Emily, there's someone here to see you. Michael Sterling." Emily's stomach clenched. "Tell him I'm not available. He says it's about your father's case. He has new evidence." Emily hadn't seen Mike since their confrontation at the warehouse, though his attempts to contact her had been relentless for the first 3 months. Eventually, his calls and texts had stopped, which she'd assumed meant he'd given up and moved on with his privileged life. "5 minutes, Emily said finally. "In your office, with you present." Mike looked terrible when Chen's assistant escorted him in. He'd lost weight. His clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd been sleeping as poorly as Emily. But what struck her most was the haunted expression in his eyes, the look of someone who discovered truths they'd rather not know. "Emily." His voice was rough with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me. You have 5 minutes." Mike placed a thick folder on Chen's desk. "Everything my grandmother told you about your father was a lie. The employment records, the compliance investigation, the meeting with the Attorney General. She fabricated all of it." Emily's carefully constructed composure cracked. "What are you talking about? Your father never worked for Sterling Industries. The ID badge, the employment contract, even the personnel file, my grandmother had them created specifically to manipulate you." Mike's voice was barely controlled. "Robert Johnson was exactly who you thought he was. A municipal accountant who died in a tragic accident." "Prove it." Mike opened the folder, revealing documents Emily had never seen before. "These are the real Sterling Industries personnel records from 2015 to 2018. Your father's name doesn't appear anywhere. The Social Security number on the fake employment contract belongs to a man who died in Oregon in 1987. Emily stared at the documents, her mind reeling. Why would Margaret lie about something so elaborate? Because she needed you to hate me enough to walk away voluntarily. She knew that if you learned about our family's wealth and power, you might try to use our relationship for financial gain. But if you believed I'd been lying about your father's death, you'd reject everything I offered. Chen was studying the documents with professional interest. These look legitimate. The paper stock, the formatting, even the corporate letterhead matches other Sterling Industries documents from that period. Margaret underestimated how thoroughly Emily would investigate. Mike continued. She didn't expect you to hire a law firm and start building a federal case. When she realized you were serious about exposing Sterling Industries, she panicked. So she confessed to you? She tried to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. Mike's laugh was bitter. Claimed I was having a breakdown, that my obsession with you was affecting my judgment. When that didn't work, she had the board of directors vote to remove me from the company. Emily felt a chill of recognition. That's why you've been calling. You're not part of Sterling Industries anymore. I renounced my inheritance 3 months ago, signed over my voting shares to a conservation trust with instructions to use Sterling Industries resources for historic preservation projects. Mike met her eyes for the first time. I also hired private investigators to look into your father's death. And Robert Johnson died because of black ice on Highway 26, exactly like the police report stated. There was no conspiracy, no corporate assassination. Just a good man driving home from work on a dangerous night. Emily's legs gave out, and she sank into Chen's desk chair. 6 months of investigation, 6 months of believing her father had been murdered, 6 months of hatred toward Mike and his family, all based on Margaret Sterling's lies. I found something else, Mike said quietly. Evidence that Margaret has been systematically targeting small architecture firms that specialize in historic preservation. Not because of your father, but because she wants to control heritage development in the Pacific Northwest. He placed another document on the desk. Your contract problems weren't personal, Emily. You were just one of dozens of firms she destroyed to eliminate competition. Emily looked at the list of company names, recognizing several firms that had gone out of business in recent years. She destroyed all these companies? And now she's trying to destroy us. Mike's voice was raw with pain. Emily, I know I lied about my identity, and I know you have every reason not to trust me. But I swear on my father's grave, I never knew who you were when we met. Meeting you in that cafe was the first genuine moment of my entire life. Chen cleared her throat diplomatically. I think you two need to have this conversation privately. As the attorney left her office, Emily stared at Mike across the desk that had become her war room against his family. How do I know you're telling the truth now? Because I've lost everything to prove it to you. My inheritance, my position in the company, my relationship with the only family I have left. Mike's voice broke slightly. Margaret has spent the past 6 months making sure I understand the price of choosing you over Sterling Industries. And what price is that? Complete exile, financial ruin, social isolation. Mike managed a weak smile. Turns out, when you're Michael Sterling, people only want to know you for your money. Take that away, and you discover how alone you really are. Emily studied his face, seeing the toll the past months had taken. What are you going to do now? Whatever you'll let me do? I've been learning carpentry, actually learning it this time. I want to help restore the buildings we can save and honor the ones we can't. Mike's voice strengthened. I want to be the man you fell in love with before you knew my name. Mike, I know it's not enough. I know I can't undo the lies or the months of pain. But Emily, if there's any chance you could forgive me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that my love for you is the only honest thing about me. Emily looked at the evidence scattered across the desk. Proof of Margaret's manipulation, documentation of corporate corruption, and the fragments of trust she'd thought were destroyed forever. The question now was whether love could survive the truth. 3 weeks after Mike's revelation about his grandmother's lies, Emily found herself standing outside Moonbeam Roastery as rain began to fall from darkening Portland skies. She'd asked Mike to meet her here, in the place where their story began, because she needed to know if they could build something real from the wreckage of so many lies. The cafe looked exactly the same as it had 9 months ago, down to the mismatched chairs and the chalkboard menu that never seemed to change. Emily chose a table near the window, the same spot where she'd first noticed Mike's expensive watch and questioned his carpenter story. Mike arrived precisely on time, shaking rain from his jacket as he scanned the crowded cafe. When his eyes found hers, Emily saw hope and fear warring in his expression. He looked different now, not the polished heir she'd discovered him to be, but not quite the fabricated carpenter either. He looked like a man who was finally figuring out who he actually wanted to be. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Mike said as he sat down across from her. "Thank you for the truth. All of it, this time." Emily had spent the past weeks verifying everything Mike had told her, using her legal team to confirm that Margaret Sterling had indeed fabricated the evidence about her father's supposed employment with Sterling Industries. The discovery had left Emily feeling unmoored. Her father really had been exactly who she'd thought he was, and her months of investigation had been based on carefully constructed lies. "I brought you something," Mike said, sliding a folder across the table. "The deed to the Pearl District warehouse. It's yours now, along with enough funding to restore it however you envision." Emily opened the folder, staring at legal documents that transferred ownership of the property to Johnson Architecture, a firm that no longer existed. "Mike, I can't accept this. It's not charity. It's justice." Mike's voice was steady, determined. "My grandmother destroyed your business with lies and manipulation. This is me trying to give you back what she stole. And what do you get out of it? The chance to work alongside you, if you'll have me. Not as Michael Sterling, heir to a fortune, but as Mike Carter, the man who wants to spend his life preserving the beautiful things this world tries to tear down." Emily studied his face, looking for any trace of deception. Instead, she saw the same expression that had drawn her to him during their first conversation. Genuine passion for the work itself, not the money or prestige it might bring. "Your grandmother won't just let you walk away from the family business. Actually, she will, because I have something she wants more than my compliance." Mike pulled out his phone and showed Emily a series of documents. Complete financial records of every illegal contract manipulation Sterling Industries has conducted over the past 20 years. Names, dates, amounts, correspondence with city officials. Everything your legal team would need to build a federal case. Emily's breath caught. "How did you get these?" "I've been part of the company's executive team for 2 years. I had access to files my grandmother never expected me to examine." Mike's smile was grim. "Turns out, when you're planning to renounce your inheritance anyway, you stop worrying about family loyalty. You're going to expose your own family? I'm going to give my grandmother a choice. She can allow the company to transform into something legitimate, with proper oversight and ethical business practices, or she can face federal charges and watch Sterling Industries collapse completely." Emily stared at the documents, understanding the magnitude of what Mike was offering. What kind of transformation? Sterling Industries becomes a force for urban renewal and historic preservation. We use our resources to support small firms like yours instead of destroying them. We work with communities instead of exploiting them. Mike leaned forward, his voice growing passionate. "Emily, we could change how development works in this city. We could prove that preserving the past and building the future aren't mutually exclusive." Outside, the storm was intensifying, rain hammering against the cafe windows with increasing force. Emily watched the water streaming down the glass and remembered another storm, another moment when her world had shifted completely. And Margaret agreed to this? She will when she sees the alternative. Federal prison isn't particularly appealing at 72. Mike's expression softened. "Emily, I know I can't undo the lies I told you. I can't give you back the months you spent believing your father was murdered. But I can offer you the truth moving forward and the chance to build something meaningful together. As business partners? As whatever you'll let us be." Emily closed the folder and looked directly into Mike's eyes. "I fell in love with a carpenter who cared more about preserving beautiful buildings than making money. Can you be that man?" "I've been learning. Actually learning this time, not just pretending." Mike pulled off his watch, the expensive timepiece that had been one of Emily's first clues about his deception, and set it on the table between them. "I sold most of the jewelry and luxury items I owned. Used the money to fund a scholarship program for architecture students from low-income families." Emily picked up the watch, feeling its weight. "What about this one? I kept it because it was my father's. He wore it every day, even when he was working in the family's original woodworking shop before Sterling Industries became what it is now." Mike's voice grew quiet. My father believed that craftsmanship mattered more than profit. I'd like to think he would have approved of what I'm trying to do. Emily handed the watch back to him. Wear it. But next time, don't hide it. Next time, Emily stood and walked to the window, watching the storm rage outside. The similarities to their first meeting weren't lost on her. The rain, the crowded cafe, the sense that her life was about to change completely. But this time, she wasn't running from disaster. She was choosing to embrace possibility. If we do this, she said without turning around, there are conditions. Name them. Complete transparency. About the business, about your family, about everything. No more protective lies, no matter how well-intentioned. Agreed. Equal partnership. I'm not interested in being the grateful recipient of Sterling Industries charity. If we're rebuilding the company, we do it together. I wouldn't want it any other way. Emily turned back to face him. And Mike, the next time you create a fake identity to hide from your problems, I'm going to feed you to the wolves myself. Mike stood and crossed to her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. Emily Johnson, I swear to you that I will never again pretend to be anyone other than the man who loves you desperately and wants to spend his life proving he deserves your trust. Thunder crashed overhead as Mike cupped her face in his hands, the same calloused palms that had convinced her he was a working carpenter all those months ago. This time, Emily knew the calluses were real, earned through hours of actual construction work as he'd learned to become the man he'd originally pretended to be. I love you too, Emily whispered, just before his lips found hers. The kiss was everything their first kiss should have been, honest, desperate, and full of the promise of building something real together. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, but inside the cafe where they'd first met, Emily and Mike were finally ready to weather whatever came next. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Emily rested her forehead against his. So what happens now? Now we go save some buildings, Mike said with a grin that reminded Emily why she'd fallen for him in the first place. And maybe along the way, we'll save each other too. Emily laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. I think we already have. As they gathered their things and prepared to face the storm together, Emily realized that sometimes the most beautiful restorations were the ones that happened between two people who'd learned that love, like architecture, required strong foundations and careful craftsmanship to stand the test of time. The tempest outside would pass, but what they were building together would endure. 2 years later, Emily wiped sawdust from her hands as she stepped back to admire the restored exposed brick wall of what would soon become affordable artist studios in the Pearl District warehouse. The morning sun streamed through the original 19th century windows, illuminating the space she and Mike had transformed from a forgotten relic into a thriving creative community. The city council approved the Burnside project. Mike called from across the room, ending a phone call with their biggest smile Emily had seen in weeks. Johnson Sterling Development just landed the contract to restore the entire historic block. Emily couldn't help but grin at their company name. After months of legal battles and federal investigations, Margaret Sterling had agreed to step down as CEO rather than face federal charges. Sterling Industries had been restructured with Mike and Emily as co-presidents, focusing exclusively on sustainable development and historic preservation. Margaret's going to hate that we're saving another building she wanted demolished, Emily said, walking over to where Mike was reviewing architectural plans. Margaret's learning to hate a lot of things about how we run the company now. Mike pulled Emily into his arms, careful not to get sawdust on her clean shirt. But she's also learning that federal oversight means she doesn't get a vote anymore. Their transformation of Sterling Industries had made national news. What had once been a company known for aggressive development tactics was now recognized as a leader in sustainable urban renewal. Emily's vision of preserving architectural heritage while creating affordable housing had attracted attention from cities across the country. Speaking of things Margaret hates, Mike said, reaching into his pocket, I have something for you. Emily's heart stopped as Mike dropped to one knee in the middle of their restored warehouse, holding a simple ring that gleamed in the afternoon light. Emily Johnson, you've already rebuilt my entire life once. Will you let me spend the rest of it rebuilding beautiful things with you? Emily looked around the warehouse where they'd had their first real conversation, where she'd discovered his lies, and where they'd finally learned to trust each other completely. The space was filled with the sounds of construction workers and artists preparing for the grand opening. But all Emily could hear was her own heartbeat. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, absolutely yes." As Mike slipped the ring onto her finger, Emily realized that their greatest restoration project hadn't been any building at all. It had been learning to construct a relationship built on honesty, trust, and the shared belief that some things were worth saving. Outside, Portland's skyline stretched toward the horizon, full of old buildings waiting for new life and new structures that would honor the past while embracing the future. Just like them.